The topic of this video includes two things that heavily interest me: the intersection of American history and folklore, and the hit FX TV series Atlanta. In the critically acclaimed episode 3 Slaps, the show opens on two men fishing on a lake at night. One of the men recounts a time in which he was pulled out of the lake and narrowly avoided drowning as a child, but could not recall what it was that caused him to go under in the first place. The other man tells him it is because the lake is haunted by the ghosts of a self-governed black town which was flooded and drowned in order to create the lake. That guy proceeds to go on a monologue about what it means to be white, and how it's more than just skin color, before turning around looking like a turbo ghoul. The other guy is then overtaken by a swarm of black hands and pulled into the lake. There are two things that struck me about this scene. The first is the juxtaposition of its overall vibe against the rest of the show. Atlanta deals with serious topics, often veering into the surreal and horror adjacent, but overall, in my mind, it remained comedically centered. This scene in particular, though, just hit me as a 100% modern horror, as if it were plucked from an A24 movie. The second thing that struck me was a series of stories I remembered hearing during the time that I lived in the Atlanta metro area. During my teens and early adulthood, I recall taking trips to Lake Lanier with my family to go swimming or float around in my father's dusty old boat, and seeing many signs warning about swimming in the lake during low tides and such. During this time in my life, I wasn't exactly tuned in to local current events, but I do remember hearing on the news every now and again about some unfortunate aquatic recreation enthusiast drowning in the lake. So, with this new and newly remembered information, I took to Google to see if there was a shade of truth to what Atlanta was saying, and guess what? There is. The story of Lake Lanier and the surrounding land is one soaked in blood and boiling with racial tensions and violence stretching all the way back to the 1800s, with two major incidents sealing the area's fate once and for all before a flood. Finding information on Oscarville, Georgia is not necessarily a simple task. Some articles and sites say it was a town, and some say it was a community similar to a suburb. The second explanation would help shed light on why it's just so difficult to locate it on any map. Due to the stigma associated with the name, I would fully understand if there was an effort to bury some of the information. Some articles say Oscarville was located next to Cumming, Georgia, and others say they were neighbors across the Chattahoochee River, but one thing is certain: its proximity to Cumming, which will become apparent shortly. Oscarville was formed in the late 1800s during the United States Reconstruction period after the Civil War. In 1910, Oscarville was said to have 1,100 residents, the overwhelming majority of them being African American. The community had its own homes, businesses, and churches, and consisted of mostly farmers, but included bricklayers, carpenters, and blacksmiths. It was likely that some goods produced in Oscarville that were to be sold were probably done so in nearby Cumming, Georgia, the seat of Forsyth County. Cumming was a nearly 100% white city. Now, I don't have the time during this video to explain all the ways in which having a mostly self-sufficient and thriving black community bordering an all-white city contained within one of the most homogeneous counties in the U.S. South shortly after the Civil War and the 1906 Atlanta race riots could lead to some tense situations, but suffice to say Oscarville was likely a target of ire from the nearby communities prior to 1912. However, the events that occurred that year kicked off a series of events that would, in a way, forever change the landscape of Forsyth County. Before we launch into what happened in 1912, let me say something. The articles that cover the events of 1912 are over 100 years old and written in post-Civil War American South. They contain some language that's no longer acceptable and deal with some events pretty casually that would cause widespread outrage in today's society. These articles also get some of the individuals mixed up, neglect to refer to which incident they're talking about as there were so many, and don't really paint the entire picture clearly. I will be leaving my sources in the description, and some of the older articles will be shown here in the video. The following is the closest interpretation of the series of events in Forsyth County in 1912 that I was able to come up with, but I will certainly make a few mistakes and am open to corrections. That being said, here we go. On September 5th, 1912, a young white female, Ellen Grice, wakes up screaming in the night in her home in Cumming. She claims that she awoke to find a black man in her bed. No one comes right out and says it, but I believe that a sexual assault is implied here. The following morning, local law enforcement arrests Rob Edwards, Tony Howell, and 3 accomplices, all African American. How and where this arrest was made is unclear, as is the evidence they had to back it up, and such is the nature of how things were handled in this era. The suspects are then taken to be held in the Cumming courthouse. Once news of the incident gets around, an angry mob forms in front of the courthouse with the intention of lynching the suspects. A black preacher named Grant Smith arrives on the courthouse steps and tries to talk some sense into the crowd, but speaks some choice words about the character of Ellen Grice, which infer that her story may possibly be bullshit. Grant Smith is quickly lashed and beaten by the mob before having to retreat inside the courthouse himself with the aid of the sheriff, Bill Reed. The courthouse is then sieged by the mob until the National Guard is finally called to attempt to break up the crowd and prevent a riot. On September 8th, an 18-year-old female named May Crow is found in the early morning washed up on the shore of the Chattahoochee River. Her head appears to have been bashed in with a rock, and it appears she has been sexually assaulted. Law enforcement finds a pocket mirror discarded in the nearby woods and, using outdated and likely predatory investigation tactics, link the pocket mirror to Ernest Knox. Knox and friend Oscar Daniel are then arrested. As I understand it, the interrogation went something like this.
Hey, this is a pretty neat pocket mirror we found on the ground over there. We also found you. We're trying to get this back to its owner. It wouldn't be yours, would it? No? Oh, I guess we'll just toss it then. Oh, you do want it? Lock him up.
It is said that the authorities then threw a rope around Knox's neck and implied that he would be hung if he didn't confess. So, given the circumstances, he confessed. Knox and Daniel are then escorted to a jail near Atlanta to await trial and sentencing, as it didn't seem like a very smart idea to add anyone else to the courthouse in Cumming, because during the days following the May Crow incident, there are still large groups forming outside the Cumming courthouse, demanding to have the suspects from the Grice incident turned over to them. Despite the efforts of the National Guard, on September 10th, it is said that Sheriff Reed finally gave up, abandoned his post, and the mob gained access to the courthouse. Rob Edwards was then removed from the courthouse, beaten, and dragged into the town square where he is hung for all to see, with some stating that his deceased body was also shot several times. There are numerous less than friendly interactions between the residents of Cumming and Oscarville leading up to September 23rd, when May Crow finally succumbs to her injuries and dies 2 weeks after her attack. Now, the Grice incident is mostly alleged, a case of he said, she said, with little to no observable evidence or consequence to the victim, and we've seen the violent reaction to that. Now, with a thoroughly documented violent and sexual assault which ultimately caused death, the racial tensions in Forsyth County were boiling over and reaching their peak. Following Crow's death, a group dubbed the Night Riders, likely due to their proclivity to ride at night, began overnight raids of the Oscarville area, taking to horseback and assaulting black residents and burning down structures, beginning with the churches, as they knew this would be the first place people think to gather during an emergency. I don't see any record of documented deaths during these attacks, but I believe it is implied due to the swift, violent, and hateful nature and scale of the attacks. The attacks by the Night Riders increased in frequency up to and through October 5th, when Ernest Knox and Oscar Daniel are sentenced by an all-white jury to hang in relation to the murder of May Crow. The judge does not want any further spectacle made of this situation, and public hangings have recently been outlawed in the state of Georgia, so it is ordered that a wall be built to shield the gallows from view of local residents. Unfortunately, shortly before the executions are to take place, the wall is burned down overnight,
and surely no one knows who could be responsible for that.
On October 25, 1912, Ernest Knox and Oscar Daniel are hung by their neck until death as about 8,000 mostly white folks look on. The Night Riders continue and even amp up their overnight racially motivated attacks and arsons following the hanging, and by 1915, Oscarville has been all but abandoned by black Americans. Some picked up and went, selling their homes, land, and businesses at a severe loss to white buyers in an attempt to leave the area as quickly as possible. Some just left everything right where it was and fled empty-handed, terrified to stay one more night in the area. The abandoned lands were then claimed through a predatory process known as adverse possession, which, as I understand it, kind of consists of a white guy going to the plot, yelling, "Hey, anyone here? No?" And then claiming the land as his own. Honestly, I didn't really look it up. It seemed insignificant in the overall circumstances. Forsyth County quickly became known as the county without an African American. In the following decades, nearby residents, particularly in Atlanta, complained of having no nearby body of water in which to recreate. So in 1947, the Georgia Chamber of Commerce decides that Forsyth County, more specifically the area which contained the remnants of Oscarville, would be a great place for a whole lake. The plans are finalized that year for the Buford Dam, at which point the ultimate thief, the government, begins acquiring 56,000 acres in the area through eminent domain, finally stealing the land once and for all from the pettier thieves who thieved it through adverse possession, following, if we're being honest here, the original theft of the land from the Native Americans. Oh, did I forget to mention that this area was also the termination point for the Trail of Tears? My bad, I could only squeeze so much tragedy into this video before it ran the risk of becoming a 90-minute dissertation on the numerous violent changing of hands the southern U.S. has been through in just a few hundred years. In 1956, the Buford Dam is opened, turned on, activated, and the once thriving community of Oscarville is flooded, with Lake Lanier expanding to fill the void left behind. A problem here is that not every structure was demolished after the acquisition of the land, as destruction or relocation was deemed too costly in many situations. So, numerous structures, infrastructures, an entire speedway, and even some cemeteries were left behind and now occupy the floor beneath the waters of Lake Lanier. Now, year after year, and especially when tides are low, recreational watercraft, sometimes but not always operated by inebriated and surly fans of high-speed aquatic activities, clip an underwater light pole, steeple of a ruined church, or some other artifact of times past, and accidents happen, sometimes resulting in injury, sometimes drowning, sometimes death. So, the hit FX TV show Atlanta was correct, in a way. The locals were not just suddenly flooded and drowned one fateful day. It was a long bureaucratic process which concluded with repossession, eviction, and warnings before the lake was filled. Is there an African American town down there? Well, yes and no. By 1915, it was said that African Americans had fled Forsyth County entirely due to the racial violence, turning over their land to nearby white buyers for pennies on the dollar, who then used the land for various purposes, presumably. Most of the leftover structures remain and were repurposed. Are there bodies down there? Absolutely. It is known that some but not all of the graveyards were relocated in the years between 1947 and 1956 during the planning and development process of the Buford Dam. Graveyards which were deemed too costly to relocate were submerged, bodies and all. Was Oscarville and its black community destroyed? Yes, but not necessarily by Lake Lanier. It was destroyed by white supremacists who killed and burned until no blacks remained, following years of post-Civil War tensions, which came to a head in 1912 with two incidents that would change the face of Forsyth County forever. P.S. I discovered an interesting post made by the production team of an upcoming Oscarville documentary which may shed a little bit of light on why the location of Oscarville is so hard to nail down, as I said earlier. The post states that in 2021, when the crew began production, a search of Oscarville, Georgia on Google Maps apparently dropped a pin right in the middle of Lake Lanier. However, when the crew searched it again in 2024, some helpful resident had relocated that pin to a completely random three-way intersection nearby. Could it be some strange technical glitch we're not fully aware of the operations behind? Yes. Could it be part of a continued attempt to erase the negative connotations surrounding the events of 1912 and the county as a whole?
Also, yes.
I hope you've enjoyed your time here at the Black Lodge. Please come back and see us sometime.